Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to an On the Couch episode of the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. What is courage? My mum doesn't really think that she's very courageous. I wanted to share with you some experiences that I grew up with, and hopefully that will explain what courage is. Before I was born, my mum grew up in a small country town in Victoria, and she wanted to be a motor mechanic. At that time, this was in the 60s. She was a teenager, living at home, hasn't really travelled anywhere. And the only way she could do that, there was no one in the area that would take her, no one in the state that would take her. Motor mechanic was a man's job back then. And through some friends who lived in New South Wales, the next state, she got an opportunity to work, be an apprentice motor mechanic at a local shop up there. So what she had to do was she had to move, take everything that she had, well, maybe not everything she had, but certainly move her life. Her parents and her brother and sister stayed at home. She went to another state, living with another family, to work in an environment dominated by men to become a motor mechanic. And I think about that and I think, wow, that's a pretty bold move. And I remember growing up as a child, so when I came into being and my sister came into being, and when we were younger, my mum would take us for walks out in the countryside, and we'd go different places, walking along tracks and drive to different locations and go for walks. And I don't recall this happening because my mum didn't let us know. But on one of those walks, she saw an animal that had been killed, sort of stabbed to death. And we never knew about it. But my mum was extremely cautious after that. So she told me when I got older. And so she would be very careful. But she was one of those things where she saw that. Obviously, she was concerned and probably scared that there was this animal that had been stabbed and left there. We never knew about it as children. We didn't experience any of that. But she obviously was scared, and she relayed that later on in life when I was talking to her as an adult, that had happened. She would also take us on trips, like holidays as well, so travelling trips. My uncle and aunt lived in the next state. They lived in South Australia, which was an 8.5-hour drive. And my mum would, there were several times we drove across the countryside, and then there was 4 children. There was myself, my younger sister, there was another sister, and then a brother. And Mum would pack us up into the car. Sometimes she'd hire a car, or we would go in her Volkswagen Beetle, and she would pack everything in. It was amazing what she could pack into this Volkswagen Beetle. So there was his mum, 4 children, all our luggage packed into this Beetle, and driving across the the country to another state, which back then too, would have been the 70s. There wasn't really the services that we have now. There certainly wasn't the connectivity. There was no mobile phones or anything like that. So if something had have gone wrong, she would have had to look after us and the four children as we're driving across what in Australia is some pretty arid land. It's not like in other countries where you've got short spaces to travel. This was long distances between towns. But she packed us up and drove across. No doubt, that was a concerning experience for her. One of those other experiences on those trips, I do remember it quite well. we, my sister and I are in the back, and we were mucking around, and we weren't behaving ourselves as you do as children, and we get constantly getting told, "Stop it, stop it!" And my mum was one for if she says she's going to do something, she does it. And so she finally said, "All right, if you don't stop it, I'm going to kick you out." And so, whatever. And we're mucking around and carrying on. So she comes to a screeching halt in the Volkswagen Beetle. It was, and she goes, "All right, you two get out." We're like, yeah, whatever. So we get out and we're standing on the side of the road. And she guns it and she takes off down the road. And we're standing there this is in the middle of nowhere. Like you look around, it's arid, it's dry, there's dry grass, there's barely any trees. And there's this road that goes from here to here, just one long road. And we're standing, my sister and I are standing there looking at each other going, what do we do? And so we're a bit like shocked. And then the car, I think it was about 100 meters down the road, pulls over to the side and stops. And so we bolt up to the car and get back in, and we're a little bit more behaved after that. But it was interesting as an adult. Again, we've talked about that story. I brought it up because I remember it quite vividly. And she said, "Yeah, I had my eye on the revision mirror the whole time, keeping an eye on you two to make sure that you're okay." Which is, again, I mean, we look at that and go, well, how much fear must have she had? How much uh, how frightened must she have been? Like she's got two kids that are misbehaving. There's another two kids in the car, and she said, "Okay, and get out, or otherwise I'm gonna. Well, if you don't stop it, you're gonna have to get out." She's got to follow through with it, otherwise you have no power at all. And then she's like, "Oh, okay, what do I do?" Which reminds me of another story that was really funny, with my mum saying that she's going to do something and then get caught. I don't remember this, but she told me, and she was getting dinner ready, and she's chopping up the vegetables, and I kept nicking them, little piece and nicking them, and she's like, "Stop it!" And I'm like, yeah, whatever, stop it, and I'd take another piece. "Ah, stop it, cut it out." And when she's not looking, I turn around, grab another, and finally she got frustrated. She said, if you do it again, I'm going to cut your fingers off." I'm like, yeah, whatever. And so I did it again, and I got caught. And she's like, this is what she's telling me as when I'm an adult. She's like, "Well, what do I do now?" It's like, I've said it, I've got to do it. And so she said she thought she'd be clever. And so she turned the knife over so that, the other side, not the sharp edge was facing down, but the other side. And she grabs my hand, but apparently I struggled so much. I cut myself anyway. So she said that was a big lesson, never to say anything that you cannot follow through on. Because if you get caught in that situation, it can be really difficult. But it does, there's a lot of situations like that. Another one I was thinking of, I remember when I was in secondary school, we lived in a small country town, and that's where I went to primary school, which was fine. I walk down the school or ride the bike, or if it was raining, we lived about 2 kilometres away from the school, and if it was raining, my mum would drive us down, which that was a little bit frustrating. But there's another story in that about not worrying about what other people think, because my mum used to wear these beanies and make me wear these beanies when it was cold to keep your head warm, and I hated it. And but she said, "Oh, don't worry about what other people think," which is sound advice, and there's another podcast talking about that and how important that is. But when I got to secondary school, the secondary school was in the next town, and we had a bus take us to school. There was actually a couple of schools and a couple of buses that went to those schools. And then, for whatever reason, I mean, the buses were free, so we didn't have to pay to get on the buses. But then, for some reason, something changed, and they decided that they were going to start charging to catch the bus to school, which my mum was outraged about and said, "No, education should be free," and you know, and she started to kick up a bit of a fuss about that, which was, again, quite interesting. Small country town, also too. I mean, there's a lot of now. As a child, I probably didn't understand how much other influences come in, but when uh, as an adult, there was all these other pressures, and the bus company is saying you got to pay for it, the local council saying you got to pay for it. So here's my mum saying, no, we're not going to pay for it, and started she started almost, it wasn't a riot, but started this thing where it's like, no, we're not going to pay for it. And she turns up, we turn up for the first time, they're going to charge us for it, and she's rallying all the children and the parents, going, no, we're not paying for this. And the bus driver's like, no, you got to pay, otherwise you can't. And then somehow, and she went. She told me later, she went to actually show the bus driver she had no money in her purse, but she had a couple of $50 notes, so she had to take them out and put them in her pocket. And then she, oh, we don't have any money, and she's going on about it and causing this fuss. And we eventually stormed the bus. So all of us kids, we stormed the bus, and the bus drivers then decided, he's going to take us to the police station. So we're all on the bus. We're all excited about it. We're kids. We go, oh, this is really cool. We're going to the police station. Yeah, we're not going to school. And we get to the police station, and then I'm not sure. Obviously, there was some discussions about things like that, and what had happened, and we all get off the bus, and parents then take us to school. Anyway, this went on. It wasn't just the one incident; it went on and on and on. As in, we're not. Mum was like, we're not going to pay it. It even got to the stage where there was news reports on it, and they're interviewing parents. And I remember watching. There was one particular parent who really never got involved in anything, but they interviewed her, and she's then standing up and going, and I was watching going, oh, you're just getting on at the tail end. But I think about that and go, well, how much, to stand up like that, to stand up for what you believe in, and regardless of what other people think. And my mum, she did that, and we got it. She got it turned over. We never paid to travel to school in the entire time I was catching the bus to school. So which was, I think, the next 4 years, I caught the bus to school, and we never paid, because my mum stood up. She had the courage to stand up. And even then, taking another step forward, I mean, when my parents, they separated, and what did we do? My mum moved out, and we moved to the city. So because we grew up in a small country town, so we've moved to the city, and started effectively a new life. And mum's taken 4 children to live in the city, look after them, find new schools. We all had to, then I was probably a bit difficult because I had a particular school I wanted to go to. I wanted to go to a trade school. They don't exist anymore, but and that now that's another topic of the shortage of labour and skilled labour. And governments had killed the trade schools off. But that's another story, and I'll whinge about that later. But she had to find, not only had she had to find a school for the 4 children, and the right school for me, because I wasn't going to go to any other school, and find a place to live, earn money to support us. And the thing was, through that entire time, and this is through my entire childhood, I don't ever recall my mum ever being worried. Now, no doubt she was. I mean, separation, and a lot of people have been through divorce and separation. It's extremely stressful. But we never experienced that as children, or I certainly don't. I didn't, and I don't think my siblings have ever mentioned anything about that. But no doubt my mum was, there was so many uncertainties. As an adult looking at it now, there was so many uncertainties that she must have dealt with solved, resolved. And then she took the step too. We had moved to the city, and then she decided that it was like she didn't want us to be too far away from our dad. So we then moved back to the country, had to find another place to live. Um, and that process went on. Um, and where, she needed to look after us and take care of us. And, you know, and it never really even stopped. Like, as later in life, I think she was around 55, where she wanted to go back to school. She wanted to get her high school diploma again. I have no idea why, but that's what she wanted to do. Now, that again must have been, relatively, scary experience. I mean, she's 55. High school children doing their diploma, they're 16, 17, 18 years old. And to go through that process of, being part of that environment, something completely outside of your comfort zone. And so I look at that and look at, what is courage? And I looked it up in the dictionary for this podcast to make sure I get the definition right. And the dictionary definition said the ability to do something that frightens one. And that's really important to think about, because when I look back at all those things that my mum did, all those circumstances I talk about, no doubt she was frightened in a lot of those environments, from a little bit of frightened to a lot of frightened, from, finding an animal that's been killed, and while you're walking with your children and not knowing, okay, is the person still out there with a knife? Although it was a choice, leaving us on the side of the road, and then, to prove a point, or to get us to behave, I would say. Prove a point's not probably right. We were misbehaving. And, to move your children to a completely different area, to the city, and having to get all that set up, getting that sorted out. I'd be surprised if a lot of those circumstances, my mum wasn't frightened a lot, but she did it anyway. And that's where it's really important when you're thinking about courage. Courage isn't, not being scared, not being afraid. I look at, and I'll save it for another podcast, but, the circumstances that I've been through where there's, some pretty traumatic stuff in there, but acted anyway. And this is where it's really important from that perspective to remember courage isn't about not having fear. Courage is acting in spite of the fear, doing it anyway. It's the same if you're going for a job interview. It can be scary. Do it anyway. Seeing someone that you're attracted to and want to meet, say hello. Those kind of things. Doing that in spite of the fear. That's what courage is. And the thing about courage too is the more you do it, the stronger that muscle gets. So that's where you want to just continue to do it. Sometimes you're in situations where you just have to. But the more you do it, the stronger you get. So remember that with courage. Courage isn't not feeling fear. It's certainly not this tough bravado, not feeling fear. Just, no matter what, I can handle it. It's being human, recognizing that there's something scary there and doing it anyway. Oh, and I just wanted to add one little PS to this podcast. If you look at the image, yes, that is really me 50 years ago, just after I was born. And yes, that's my mum, who's quite an amazing woman in so many ways.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.